So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and it's been quite a while since we've done a free-for-all, and the player who sent this one in was quite keen for me to do this one, so I figured that now would be a good time to do it. And it also does mean that the sort of de facto subject of quite a few of the most recent replays in Erebor gets to continue, because both of the factions for the blue team in this battle are going to be Erebor, so this is going to make up the dwarven contingent of this free-for-all, and that will make Erebor a bit of a subject as we go along. So let's go ahead and have a look at this team first of all, starting off with Bogdan18k, who is the player who sent me this battle replay. Now, Erebor are interesting. I feel as though maybe they've been getting a little bit more flack from me than is deserved, although I will certainly say that, you know, the crossbow thing, I'm not going to mention it overly in this battle, but I would say that they lean very heavily on it, and I do believe, still, adamantly, that the reason why Erebor and Cardland have become more popular is the fact that their crossbows are so effective. You know, there's really not much of a reason otherwise why that would be, but that's the last that you're going to hear me really speak of it in that tone in this particular battle, because one of the other reasons why Erebor in particular will be a very popular faction to play as is because they offer you that ranged punch from their armor-piercing missiles, but also they have good infantry, of course, dwarven infantry. It might not be on quite the same level as Khazad-dûm, but it's still very, very high up there in the sort of levels of infantry that you can expect to field. And then, of course, they also have a cavalry force which is not quite as limited as Khazad-dûm's. Khazad-dûm's cavalry is still useful, but it is quite limited in terms of its scope. Erebor does not suffer from that. They have a unit of knights, they have chariots, in addition to good supporting cavalry as well. But we'll see how well they can do here. I do feel as though Erebor are one of the most well-rounded factions in 0.97, to be honest with you, based on what I've seen so far. But we'll see how they do here. So we've got some iron for halberds for some armor-piercing phalanx action. Just in behind we have the Highborns of Erebor, which is going to be the General's Bodyguard unit, a very strong unit of uber-tier dwarven infantry, as well as, of course, some iron foot spears, more iron foot halberds. Erebor legionaries back here, of course, the higher-end unit of line infantry that Erebor can field. Of course, we have the crossbows. We have more crossbows as well, deploying their stakes. We do have some humans on the field, taking up arms alongside their dwarven allies, some mercenary guildsmen. Of course, the reason you would bring these guys is the fact that they have maces, so they are armor-piercing now. We also have some melee cavalry in the shape of the mercenaries. We, of course, have the Ironfoot Wargoat Chariots, who don't have the same level of numbers as the equivalent Khandish Chariots, but they are quite similar in function. They have their crossbows for those bolts that they fire as they move, but of course, Chariots, the main reason to bring them, of course, is ploughing through enemy lines. And I believe that's going to be made more of a focus. I think one of the things in the hotfix is they're going to beef up the Erebor Chariots to have better stats, but they are going to lose a couple more unit models. It'll be interesting to see how that works out, because I've gone on record for saying I prefer having more unit models in Chariots, so we'll see if that makes them better or worse. Iron for Hammerguard back here, of course, the Dwarven Knights, essentially, and then more of the same with Erebor Legionaries and Merc Guildsmen on this side. I'd imagine it's quite a similar story over here with Vedetas, his ally. Some Erebor Legionaries over here, some Ironfoot Spears, of course, a strong core of infantry supported by those nasty crossbows, and in a free-for-all situation, if you can get your crossbows positioned just so, it can be very painful for the opposing sides. Blacklock Engineers as well, obviously. This is another unit where if you let them take up a good position, they are going to rip through the entirety of your army. Over here we also have some Ironfoot Pikes for some longer range phalanx action. Back here we have more Highborns, and then we have the cavalry contingent from Vedetas' army, once again made up of the higher tier units of Ironfoot Wargoat Chariots and Ironfoot Hammerguard. Then, in the northern portion of this desert map, we have the combined forces of Gondor and Dol Amroth, classic alliance, Ying Toaster Chan playing as Dol Amroth with some Perithil Riders, two units of which I'm not sure they'll do so well against the dwarves, to be honest with you. They can probably outrange the crossbows, which does mean that Erebor will be kind of at their mercy, but at the same time the dwarves can soak up arrow fire much better than most other kinds of factions, so the amount of kills they get is probably going to be quite limited. Haven Knights, though, another very nice cavalry unit that Dol Amroth can feel very difficult to break down, even for the dwarven units that are arrayed against them. Some Doranernal Archers, once again, they can outrange Erebor easily, but Erebor can absorb that fire and then just march up with their more damaging units. Doranernal Pikemen and Ethelond Men-at-Arms all together. Varying degrees of armour upgrades placed on all of these units as well, but a good phalanx, and it will need to hold against any sort of dwarven advance, but based on their positioning, I'd imagine they're not too eager to just charge into the breach. Some Belfast Marines, Javelins will be very important if the dwarves do come for them, some Perithil Horse Guard, and then some Knights the Silver Swan back here as well. And then his ally in Gondor, you want to tell me about her? Oh dear, that's a bit of an ominous name. But we have some Marksmen of Carandos here at the front, We have some Gondor Archers, so a lot of archers, as you may expect from Gondor in this sort of battle. Obviously in a free-for-all, having these archers means that you can play tag with your opponents for longer, and Gondor are very, very good at that, so it's a sort of situation where they can shine. No armour upgrades though, so just the mail and tabards on their Gondor Archers and Gondor Infantry, and then back here some stronger units in the shape of the Fountain Guard, the Citadel Guard as well. Nice armour piercing on all these units, some Raven Helms of Caer Andros, some unupgraded Axemen of the Sarnak. You don't see them without their armour upgrades all that much. This is a unit model way back from vanilla. Not often you get to see it. Gondor Spearmen back here as well, so a pretty well-rounded army. We'll see how it performs in this particular battle. Back here we have Mirkwood, played by Tex2 Dame. It's so nearly even teams. It was so nearly men, evil men, dwarves and elves, but the evil men and the elves have sort of cross-pollinated, as it were, and Mirkwood are going to be fighting alongside Umbar today, and Lothlorien alongside Kharn. Bows of Emenduir, as well as some Blades of Emenduir. Mirkwood may struggle actually here against Gondor with all the archers that Gondor have brought. Mirkwood don't tend to do very well in a really elongated skirmish fight. They can, you know, their accuracy and damage can really help them, but ultimately the main bulk of their army is going to suffer a little bit too much at the hands of the archers. If, you know, considering the relative compositions, I would say Mirkwood maybe not going to be enjoying that particular fight, so they may have to reevaluate who they decide to go for first. Elder Council over here, as well as some Elven King's Palace Guard, of course one of the most deadly units of infantry that are in the game, and then just in behind them we have some Sindar of the Girdle as well, one of the most deadly units of cavalry, which is currently in the game. These two allies are a little bit disparate, however, as Umbar, they can cover that ground relatively easily, but Umbar are going to have to deal with Lorien quite quickly. Warlords of Umbar, full line of Corsair infantry, as well as some Balaketh marksmen, so a decent presence of archers, but you know, the Corsair infantry only have so much ammunition. I would back Lothlorien to win that skirmish fight relatively easily if that's how they decide to play it. Belagai Pikemen and Alcarondas Legion is a good phalanx though, so it's going to be difficult for Lothlorien to just smash them to bits with their skill. Narun Aru Sentinels, a Dunheim Shield Guard and Harbingers of Castamere as well, so overall quite a thin Umbar army, but there's plenty of quality packed into it, as you would probably expect. There's some Riders of the Goldenwood right out here on the flank from Lothlorien, getting ready to use their Silver Thorns to maybe break up any sort of Umbar advance, but I doubt Umbar want to move forward with the amount of archers they brought, to be honest with you. We have some Kindred of Celeborn. Is that 2 units of Kindred of Celeborn? I believe it is. That's a bold move to bring 2 of them, but that is a lot of split shot that they are going to be able to loose upon Umbar, and it will force Umbar into action, I think. Of course, that is also Kachunka the Easterling. Over here we have Silver Banshee, who has also got some Lorenan Spearmen. Lorenan Archers, a lot of archers to be honest with you, including some Spears of the Wood, Lorenan Spearmen, and then some Lorenan Axemen as well. Based on the fact that they've got sort of not a lot of archers of high quality, Umbar being forced to move forward might not be the worst thing for Umbar in the end, because of course Lorien have had to compromise on their infantry strength quite a bit because of that. And then finally we have Khan, played by Mr. Axeguard. He has got some retainers, lots of retainers, some Brotherhood of the Lance, probably one of the most difficult units to use well in the current meta with how they perform, but we'll see. Brotherhood of the Wain, we also have some Chieftains Vanguards and Beriac Cataphracts, and then lots of Nurad, as you would expect, some Footmen for the AP, some Brotherhood of the Spear, which are a very effective unit for what they are, Brotherhood of the Axe, and then we also have some Nurad Stormguard as well. So, as you would expect, maybe Khan have got a lot of cavalry, albeit melee cavalry, not a huge amount of range there. Most of their force, however, is made up of armour-piercing infantry as well, so should be quite an interesting fight, and let's begin. So, I would imagine here there's going to be quite a tentative opening. Everyone has sort of set up in a relatively defensive position, as you would expect, in a free-for-all that's on a map as open as this. You know, being on a map this open, you know, most people in a free-for-all want to start off quite conservatively, which means they're unlikely to just charge on in to an engagement unthinkingly. But I believe what is happening, based on the fact that Kharn and Lothlorien are peeling off to maybe try and engage Umbar, and based on the fact that Dol Amroth are sending some expeditionary forces over here to maybe try and poke and prod at Erebor, that we may very well see the battle split off 2 and 2. And Lothlorien, to be honest with you, are probably in a pretty good position here to rain some hell down upon Umbar. They have taken a big risk here in bringing 2 units of the Kindred, but it will pay off if Umbar decide to just sit here and take it, because the split shot is now coming in, taking a huge toll already on the Umbar forces, getting into the Warlords of Umbar. tearing through the Corsair infantry. Of course, the damage that they do over time is going to be very important. They need to get some good shots off with them, though. They can't afford to waste too much of this ammunition. We shall see how the Kindred get along there. But yeah, Umbar already probably feeling the pressure a little bit here. It is worth saying, however, that Lorien do need to be a little bit careful here with their Silverthorns. The Riders of the Goldenwood should easily be able to outpace the Warlords of Umbar, and indeed they will here. They could kite them around and try and kill them. It would take pretty much all of their ammunition, I would think. Although turning their backs to them, losing the shield value might not be the thing the Warlords of Umbar want to do here against a unit as deadly as the Riders of the Goldenwood. Huge amount of missile damage. The Silverthorns won't really help against cavalry, but even so, damage is damage, and against a target like that, it can only be a good thing. The dwarves sort of shifting their focus over here, I think, toward Dol Amroth. Dol Amroth and Gondor still relatively static, and in a free-for-all, if you can keep most of your army in good shape early, you're setting yourself up for good things. You can see over here that Mirkwood starting to send some Woodland Round patrol over, which is probably not what Lothlorien wanted to see. You can also see over here that any archers that are sticking out of these formations, that should be where Khan's army comes into play. So I do quite like the composition here that Lothlorien and Khan have built. It is quite high risk if the Kindred of Celeborn are not used effectively. It could get pretty ugly for them, and you can see here that Cthulhu the Eastling, this is probably one of those frustrating situations for him where he can't really use his Warlords of Umbar as he wants to. He has to chase the Riders of the Goldenwood off, but every time he does, he needs to also move back, especially now that Khan are over here, because if he chases the Riders of the Goldenwood all the way, the Khandish cavalry is going to overwhelm his knights and kill them really easily. And honestly, at this point, the best he can maybe hope for from his Warlords of Umbar is absorbing the Silverthorn arrows from the Riders. The Corsair infantry maybe trying to attempt a few volleys in return into the Riders of the Goldenwood, but the multiple HP nature of them means these relatively low quality projectiles are probably not going to do the business there. Warlords of Umbar still just hovering here. Riders of the Goldenwood still just hanging out. Chieftain's Vanguard also starting to fire in, albeit into some of the cheaper units from Umbar. So Umbar definitely under the cosh here a little bit, and this is, I think, where Mirkwood should be coming into play. Mirkwood should also be putting a little bit of pressure down on Lothlorien, although their army is awfully stretched. They're keeping a lot of units in reserve to maybe meet some sort of Gondorian advance, but personally, if I were Mirkwood here, I would not be concerned about Gondor at all. They're so far away, they don't have anything really in the way of cavalry. Dol Amroth's going to have their hands full with the dwarves trying to hold their Ironfoot units at bay. You need to come over here and sort of front up against Lothlorien fully. Otherwise, Lothlorien are going to be very comfortable in just sniping out individual archer units like this. And more to the point, your ally is also going to continuously be losing manpower. Umbar are one of those factions which can hold up to this sort of punishment a little bit better than most. They have a lot of shielded units, they have a lot of heavily armoured units, and when things get into melee here, they have exactly the right kind of units to be able to hold out for a long time, but it's still not the situation that Cthulhu would probably want to be in this battle. I mean, he's already basically lost his Warlords of Umbar for no real return. They haven't done anything yet. All they've really done is acted as a bit of a pincushion. Riders of the Goldenwood over here, they've lost only one unit model, really? Meanwhile, having a look over on the other side of things, Dol Amroth and Gondor trying to shift as the dwarves continue to march ever forward. You can see there the Parathor riders moving around to the side. Gondor and Dol Amroth, I think they need to choose the ground they fight on wisely here, because if they allow the dwarves the high ground here, if they back up right against the canyon wall, the crossbow is going to be able to take up position on this raised ground here and just rain death down upon them. And that's not the situation they want to be in at all. They're going to need all the help they can get in a melee fight anyway against dwarven infantry. And they have quite a lot in terms of numbers, but really they really cannot afford to be giving the dwarven crossbows free rein to shoot into them, because otherwise it's only going to end in one way. And it's not a human victory. And the problem is, they do have a lot of lancers, which may be what they're betting on here, and a fair amount of AP infantry as well, but the problem is the dwarves have got their bases covered there, and you can see the dwarves just spreading out as they are wont to do. And as soon as they're ready and in position, I can imagine that the crossbows are going to move forward onto the hill. The infantry is going to take point and hold the enemy infantry in place, and things are probably going to get fairly ugly for the humans here unless they can choose their ground a little bit better here. There's also quite a lot of AP infantry on the dwarven side of things as well, with these halberds, which is not good news for Dol Amroth or Gondor. Both of them, of course, pretty heavy on the old armour. Spears of Emondwyr, meanwhile, this was, again, from a Mirkwood perspective, this is kind of suicidal. Like, I'm not really sure what they were hoping to achieve here by sending forward these 2 units of Spears of Emondwyr. They were never going to be able to achieve much here, because Lorenan Daxman, while there is the matter of Ironfoot Warriors when they have an attack upgrade being able to beat them, that's more an issue for the Ironfoot Warriors being too strong for what they offer, rather than the Lorenan Daxmen being ineffective. The Lorenan Daxmen are an elven high tier infantry unit that wield axes, which means they have higher attack, and that of course means that basic elven spears are going to be sent packing very, very quickly. And it's a surprise really, because the Mirkwood player has played before. I've seen him play several times. He should probably know a little bit better than to just send spears to their doom. Meanwhile, Khand are over here trying to give Umbar the business, but it's going to be easier said than done here. With all of this Khandish cavalry, the Brotherhood of the Wain and the Chieftain's Vanguard trying to rain some death down upon the Umbar lines. But the problem that Khand are going to have here is a lot of Umbar's line is made up of spears and pikes. So units of melee cavalry like the Nurad Retainers are not going to be sufficient really to do the damage they want. The Warlords of Umbar now are scoured from the field, which is good from their perspective of course. You can see here there are those Castamir's Rangers as well trying to rip through the Khandish cavalry there, but Umbar have done pretty well considering the rough hand they were dealt. But now Umbar and Mirkwood are pretty much split in half here, and Lothlorien are moving in, I think smelling blood in the water from a Mirkwood perspective. Mirkwood now have got these units of Woodland Realm Axemen phasing into view, and based on the fact that Gondor has moved off and now it's the Dwarves they may have to worry about from this position, Mirkwood I think are finally now moving in, and Lothlorien in many ways are making the same error that Mirkwood just made, albeit not in quite the same magnitude. You know, Lorien do have some units in reserve here, and to be quite frank, Lorien can't really be aggressive in this sort of way because Lothlorien's army is so heavily based around their archers that they only have a few units of infantry, and this may be their undoing at the hands of Mirkwood here, because Mirkwood can go blow for blow with them. In terms of archers, I think the Kindred of Celeborn need to get firing to do damage quickly, and I think actually Khand are moving across now. And they are going to attempt to do some damage with their cavalry here, which was sorely needed. But you can see here the Brotherhood of the Lance, their glass cannon nature really coming into effect here as the Mirkwood archers gave them a few volleys on the approach. They do manage to get a charge in, but it is uphill, and it is into elven infantry of course. With their skill, they tend to be able to mitigate charge damage quite effectively. Khan's cavalry is coming in, but from a Khandish perspective it's probably unfortunate really that they've gone for so much melee cavalry, because for the most part, they can count on having quite a lot of cav superiority here. Umbar are now moving forward. A very dynamic fight happening on this side of things. Initially, it was looking like Mirkwood and Umbar were in a bit of a sticky situation, but now things are starting to turn around a little bit. Meanwhile, over here, as with most fights, with the Dwarves, it must be said, slow and plodding. You can see over here that the Ironfoot Wargoats, it's all a matter of positioning here, because if the Dwarves, I'm sure they know, that if they get into a good position with their skirmishers, they get their infantry into a set position. Gondor and Dol Amroth, to a large extent, have dug their own grave here by hemming themselves in. But we shall see. Down here, meanwhile, elf against elf, Lothlorien taking on Mirkwood, trying to kill Mirkwood quickly, and to be fair, Mirkwood are on the back foot here because Lothlorien are getting support from the Khandish cavalry. The Kindred of Celeborn are firing in, a real battle of the Titans here as the Elders of the Elven King return volleys. But there are 2 Kindred of Celeborns. Can Mirkwood hold out long enough for their allies in Umbar to help them out? Possibly. I mean, you can see here Khand descending across more and more infantry. Umbar have basically got a clear shot here to try and move into the back of Lothlorien and Khand. You can see here Khand have got Brotherhood of the Sword. They've got all sorts of very elite units actually. So yeah, Mirkwood, if Umbar don't get there quickly, Mirkwood will fall. But to be fair, Mirkwood could do enough damage here to just make sure that Umbar ensure their legacy lives on. Mirkwood's front line is still holding up, mostly because Lothlorien didn't have enough infantry to really take advantage of the opening they had. Woodland Realm Patrol coming over here as well. Sindar of the Girdle's still sort of hanging back here. They're rather fortunate that the Kindred of Celeborn have had better things to shoot at, really, to occupy their time with. Because otherwise that would be the perfect unit to go for. There's a lot of dead Mirkwood units, so I mean it has been a very bloody fight indeed. Meanwhile over here, moving forwards, we can see that Gondor setting up sort of an initial line, maybe trying to use these archers, the Doran Ernil archers. Gondor had a lot of archers as well, but again, against the Dwarves, like, if they go for the unshielded units like the halberds, you know, maybe try and shut down, you know, as many of those kinds of units as they can with all the archers that they've brought here, the Numenorian inheritor kingdoms of men. But I worry for them here from an infantry standpoint. And then there's just the fact that these crossbows they have set up on the hill, you know, there's Blacklock engineers over there as well, and you can see that they really have nowhere left to run at this point. Like, they've tried to fall back and they're trying to get into a good position. I can tell that that's what they're trying to do, but ultimately there's a situation where you have to just sort of throw caution to the wind, I think, and try and force the issue, because they did have superior numbers here to the dwarves, if only just. You know, there's trying to shut down those crossbows may have been the thing to do. The mercenary cavalry following through. There's Wanderers of Nimrodel and Dol Amroth archers here just being hunted by the mercenary cavalry. Not the most effective cavalry in this sort of situation, but they're still doing the business here because there's no support over here. There's Gondor spearmen right there, which probably should be helping the archers out. They are now moving in. And it's a bit late. Highborns of Erebor in the vanguard. Yeah, and the dwarves, they must be loving life at the moment. They are in the ideal position. And Dol Amroth and Gondor need to do a little bit better here, otherwise the dwarves are in the ascendancy, and no matter what the result on the other side, you know, the dwarves are not really going to be feeling too much pressure at this point. And again, this is another issue with the crossbows. You know, I'm trying not to complain about them, but the Dol Amroth cavalry is helpless in this situation, really. You know, for a faction that has such deadly cavalry, there's nothing they can do. One unit of dwarven cavalry and several units of dwarven crossbows is really all it takes to nullify the cavalry threat Dol Amroth pose pretty much entirely. And you can see over here the mercenary cavalry, and this turns it around. Dol Amroth had by far the better cavalry force, really. I mean, you know, far is maybe a bit of a stretch if you take into account the chariots, but here the dwarves are just able to bully a cavalry-centric faction like this, and Gondor and Dol Amroth have brought a lot of this upon themselves, I would say. But again, like, I find it very, very difficult to say that I feel good about this sort of thing from Erebor. I'm trying not to sort of complain about this because I know what people's opinions on them are, but you know, it is what it is. Like, personally, I feel as though they shouldn't just be able to sit there and allow their crossbows to do all of the heavy lifting for them, which is at the moment what they can do, albeit in this situation the crossbows should be able to exact a very heavy toll on Gondor and Dol Amroth because they allowed them the high ground and allowed them a perfect shot, so there is that to look at as well. Mirkwood, meanwhile, you can see here that Khand and what's left of Lothlorien have sort of fallen back, trying to get into a more advantageous position as Umbar was hounding their backlines, but it is worth saying they weren't able to fully finish off Mirkwood, but Khand and Lothlorien were able to mostly kill Mirkwood. There's not much of them left, and now it's still a very close fight though, because Lothlorien's army was very small to begin with, based on them going into the red limit for some very key units. So we shall see. But Khand, a lot of AP units, which should be very useful against Umbar, albeit the quality of Umbar's units like the Alcarondas Legion should still be more than enough to deal with units like Nurad Footman. Oh dear. Is that Rangers that were just firing? Possibly. Chieftain's Vanguard over there on the flank. Umbar now feeling maybe a little bit more confident, seeing the relative size of their army compared to their opponents, but they do need to be a little bit careful here because Lothlorien do have some very good supporting archers, including, of course, the absolutely devastating kindred of Celeborn, who are just teeing off into the Elders of the Elven King there. Their multiple HP is saving them quite a bit here, but they can't afford to take too much of that. I think the key engagement over on this side of the battle is definitely going to be whether Umbar have the quality to finish off Khand or not, because Lothlorien have got some support coming in here, but I'd be interested to see how the Nurad get on. And initially, because the pikes were lagging a little bit further behind, the Alcarondas Legion may not be having the better end of the engagement over here, and key units, of course, the Brotherhoods. Oh, excuse me. Units like the Brotherhood of the Sword, Brotherhood of the Axe, wherever they are, of course, the Alcarondas Legion are not going to have a free pass of it, and I think Khand are in a good position here. Castamir's Rangers are a worry, but Khand have got cavalry that really should be able to shut them down. Meanwhile, while it has been a very sort of messy fight over on the other end of things, over here the dwarves have been very organised, as you would expect from a heavy infantry faction like them. And you can see here, Gondor are still trying their best. There goes the Gondor General. That was ideal timing. But Gondor's archers, they do have a lot of archers, and to be fair, the dwarves have not really been able to shut them down to a great extent just yet. And the dwarves at this point are probably losing quite a lot of men, just because of the archers. Like, again, the dwarves can soak up a lot of arrow fire better than most because of their plate armour and shields. But even so, like, it doesn't matter how much armour and shields you have, to an extent. If you're taking that much arrow fire from good quality archers like Marksmen of Caer-Andros, Wanderers of Nimrodel especially, you're going to be in a bit of trouble. And you can see here that Dol Amroth have managed to overlap with some of their superior numbers here. Perithil riders trying to charge into the back, trying to shut down the Blacklock engineers. Wisely, they will be killed. But just trying to shut them down for as long as possible is going to be important. Knights of the Silver Swan and Haven Knights. I do think Dol Amroth do need to be a little bit more proactive with this cavalry. There are openings now which they need to take. They need to get into these crossbows and they need to do damage because, you know, I don't really fancy Gondor and Dol Amroth's chances the longer this turns into a big infantry slog, because neither of them really brought the level of quality that was necessary. You know, Gondor a little bit more so with Fountain Guard and Citadel Guard, but they were always going to be the target of all the crossbows. The rest of it, basic pikes and men-at-arms, it's not going to be enough against heavily armoured, good quality Dwarven infantry. Ironfoot Halberds getting into the door and Ernal archers. Yeah, Dol Amroth's cavalry needs to maybe do a little bit more, unless they maybe just run them off and save them for later in the battle. It's a valid technique. Khand over here, meanwhile, you can see Realm of Lothlorien getting in here, Harbingers of Castamere on the front line. Is there anything left at this point of Mirkwood? I don't really think so. Well, there are a few units, but they're trying to sort of use Umbar as a bit of a shield over here, trying to get some of their units into a good position, but Umbar doesn't have much life left in them, I don't think. Yeah, there goes Thranduil. In and amongst the Lothlorien spears there. They've been doing quite a bit of damage back here, to be fair, but I don't think Umbar and Mirkwood at this point have got the legs left in them, especially not with Veriag Cataphracts just smashing everything to bits back here. Obviously a unit of knights is always going to be a very difficult thing to slow down when you don't have anything really to answer them. There's still really strong units as well, like Nurad Stormguard. Khand have got a lot of their strength left, really, in terms of infantry. This might put a bit of a dent in it, though. The Elven King's Palace Guard. The Narunaaru Sentinels will stand and fight to the bitter end, which will be an annoyance that they have to deal with, but ultimately I think for Mirkwood and Umbar at this point, it's just a case of, can we kill enough of Lothlorien and Khand so they don't win? There goes Imrahil. Pancaked by one of the Ironfoot Hammer Guard. Lorenan Spearmen, there you can see the Kindred of Celeborn. It is important, I think, rather like the crossbows, it's kind of important with the Kindred of Celeborn that you get a straight shot, because otherwise so many of the extra projectiles tend to miss. They're trying to go after these Adunheim Shield Guard over here, and a lot of them are hitting the target, to be fair. Yeah, it's only a matter of time here. The Harbingers of Castamere victorious here in the middle, but that is going to be a Pyrrhic victory at most, I think. Castamere's Rangers still trying to do the business over here. Still a very competitive fight going on over here. Meanwhile, there's routing Dol Amroth pikemen, which is never really a good thing. You can see here that the dwarves are now managing to punch really very far into the backfield of Dol Amroth and Gondor. Still fighting to the bitter end here, but I do think the dwarves are going to end this battle in relatively good condition, albeit it's still like the crossbows are still got ammunition. I would assume they don't have a lot of ammo left, but even so, it's going to be difficult in the late game. If you've got high quality skirmishers with ammunition in the late game, it can make a big difference. These mercenary guildsmen have gotten maybe a little bit far ahead of themselves, and they do rout, of course, mercenaries with lower morale. But when you've got the Highborns of Erebor at the tip of the arrowhead in your army, it's always difficult to stop. I mean, the Marksmen of Caer-Andros, I've gone on record as saying they're one of my favourite units because of how good they are in melee. But there's a limit to what they can accomplish here. Highborns of Erebor backed up by all of these sort of dwarven mainline units. There's no way they're going to be able to withstand that. Back over here, Gondor Archers. Has the Dol Amroth cavalry evacuated, or is it dead? No, it has gone, so that's actually a fairly good move here. So Dol Amroth, if their cavalry can then link up with whoever wins the fight on the other side, they can maybe try and bring down the beast that is Erebor. Because the forces that are still fighting on foot are very much on their last legs, with Gondor Archers not really going to be able to put up too much of a fight against professional dwarven infantry, to say the least. Meanwhile, Illidan indeed. Here comes some Nurad footmen, so yeah, at this point Khan's swarming all over, finally smothering, I think, what's left of Umbar. Oh, excuse me. My voice is on the verge of, like, collapsing once again, I think. Nurad footmen coming in here. Good amount of AP that Khan still has left, and you know, you'd be surprised what the Storm Guard can accomplish. They are a very good unit indeed. They're another unit which was maybe a little bit unfortunate not to get into my top 10, but again, there's a lot of good units in the game, to be fair. There's more good units than bad, which is always a good sign. Elven King's Palace Guard taking a charge there from the Variag Cataracts. They're another unit, though, you really want to be careful charging into them. They can mitigate a lot of charge damage with their melee defense if they face the right way. And then they can absolutely butcher basic cavalry with their anti-cav bonus. Variag Cataracts being knights are made of sterner stuff, but even still. Brotherhood of the Axe still here. A lot of Brotherhood units still. Brotherhood of the Sword. Not necessarily going to be the best at killing dwarves in the late game, but we'll see. There's one Harbinger left. A lot of Elven Spears that he will surely meet his ends fighting. And there goes the end of Mirkwood. So yeah, that's going to be pretty much it from Mirkwood and Umbar. A pretty brave stand, considering the way they set up in the early game probably wasn't the best, and I think that, you know, Lothlorien and Khan made the most of that. There were moments where it could have gone the other way, but I think Lothlorien and Khan, for the most part, played very well with one another. Meanwhile, I think that's pretty much the end of things over here as well. Erebor Legionaries, some Wanderers of Nimrodel running off into the distance as well. So the Dol Amroth player clearly does know what he's doing. He's sort of moving off, and he is going to try and do his thing in the late game. There's actually still some Gondor Archers fighting here in the backfield against a single unit of Ironfoot Spears. Ironfoot Spears actually being overwhelmed by Gondor Archers. I find that difficult to believe. The Ironfoot Spears should absolutely be feeling quite confident about their chances of fighting their way out of this situation, but we shall see. A competitive free-for-all thus far, though, and I think this is the first time we've seen the Dry Lake Bird on 0.97, which is nice. There's still some Dwarven cavalry moving around, although Khan have got their own knights as well, so they're absolutely not going to have everything their own way. No chariots left from the dwarves, though, I think. Again, chariots are definitely one of those units which will fizzle out over the course of a longer battle, ploughing through units like that, especially against a faction like Gondor who have got like Fountain Guard and Citadel Guard in their ranks. Chariots will be able to disrupt lines to a large extent, and that definitely helped the dwarves on their advance here. But there's very little chance that you're going to be seeing your chariots come out of the other end of the battle alive, just because of the nature of the kind of unit that they are. So, let's see. I think we will kick things into to times 6 speed for a little bit here, because obviously Lothlorien and Khan are going to have to swivel around to meet Erebor, and then there's the wild card of Dol Amroth as well, still in the battle so far. I don't think Umbar have got anything left. And so that will make, of course, Umbar and Mirkwood technically the only teams who have fallen completely so far. Just having a look at things, I mean, Nurad footmen, but not in great numbers. Brotherhood units still here, but just based on the amount of men left, I think that the dwarves hold a bit of an advantage here. If Lothlorien still have enough ammunition to make the dwarves a little bit uncomfortable and force them to move forward, then maybe through some clever positioning, Lothlorien and Khan can make something work, and of course Dol Amroth can help them with that. But if we just skip over to here, you can see that, you know, Erebor have not got a massive army left compared to what they started with, but they definitely still, I think, hold a bit of a numbers advantage. Maybe not in terms of individual quality, but a bit of a numbers advantage here as we press on. The Ironfoot crossbows here. What are they actually firing at? There's nothing in range other than units that are routing, I don't think. That's a bit of an interesting mistake if that's what they're intending to do. Firing away at units that are already routing. Very strange indeed. Unless they're going... well, no, Gondor Archers are already routing, surely. Whatever happens to that Dol Amroth cavalry, there it is. Surely they're not going to go after... well... having a look at the situation here. I guess it is maybe a little bit closer than I was initially giving them credit for. Purely because... if it comes down to melee, Lothlorien, of course, they still have their Kindred of Caliborn, who Of course, it's not only their split shot that they're good for, they're also very, very accomplished in melee as well. Any heavy Elven Archer, including the Loreland Archers here, are of course going to be able to pull their weight in melee. That's not a good sign, however. The fact that they've got their 2 blades out now sort of indicates they are out of ammunition, which means that they're going to just be inviting pressure here as the dwarves move forward. Whatever happens here is going to be a battle which is decided relatively quickly as we move into the late game here. As it often turns out to be in a free-for-all, both armies really just put all of their might into their initial engagements, and then late on it's sort of just 2 haggard wrecks trying to finish one another off. I would give the advantage to the dwarves here though, purely because I do believe they have still got enough ammunition to affect the fight. And of course any kill that they can get here is going to make a big difference. As the crossbows trudge their way forwards, still the hammer guard as well, which means the Khandish cavalry is not going to be able to just sort of run roughshod into the backlines and stop the crossbows. And they still, there's still blacklocks as well, which is always a very worrying sight indeed. In come the Chieftain's Vanguard though. They have managed to get in behind the lines here, and they are managing to get into the crossbows here. The addition of the Ironfoot pikes is important as well, because it means of course they can hold most units at arm's length as long as their morale holds. That is going to be the end of the Chieftain's Vanguard, I would hazard a guess. But at the very least they've managed to sort of prevent the Ironfoot crossbows from doing their thing as effectively as they would have liked. Nurad Footman over here as well, some Spears of the Wood. Will the skill and damage of the elves prove to be decisive here, as the Brotherhood of the Sword taking some bolts to the face? Highborns of Erebor, Nurad Footman pursuing the Ironfoot Spears, so perhaps Erebor's slightly lower morale than their Morian cousins may come into play here. Kindred of Celeborn going to tear their way through the Ironfoot Spears here. Yeah, and here come the Parathil Riders, so Dol Amroth, even if this fight starts to really go against Erebor, they may decide to continue to try and kill the dwarves in retribution for the treatment they received early on. And honestly here, I think a big part of, if the dwarves go on to lose this, I think a big part of that may be just because they got their crossbows way too close before they started firing. They had an opportunity there to really tee off into some key units for Lothlorien and Khand, and they didn't take it. They may not have much in the way of ammunition left. You can see that they're actually pulling out their weapons and shields now on most of these units, but still, it's an opportunity that really did present itself. Where are the Blacklocks? There they are. Unfortunately for them though, the Blacklocks have been sort of halted in their tracks. They're not able to get into a good position so far. The Highborns are sort of facing off against the Kindred. Yeah, and overall it may just come down to sheer manpower here. I think the dwarves just had a little bit too much left in the tank. Quality... No, overall, the average quality of the units was probably in favour of the Elven Khandish alliance here in the late game, but as the fight is continuing, I think it's fairly clear to see that overall it's going to come down to just numbers here. And it's not as if the Dwarven army was made up of terrible units either. I mean, they had a solid core of pikes, backed up by Highborns and Blacklocks. And now it is, once again, the Dwarven cavalry able to get in behind, get some rear charges right into the middle, doing their thing, and the Blacklocks still firing away. They actually have a good angle there into the Khandish wing of this army as well. So a very well threaded shot there from the Blacklocks. And you can see over here it's really only the Kindred that are keeping this side of the line in order. The Brotherhood of the Sword and Axe trying their best, but again, good units, but just not enough of them left in the late game. They expended a lot of their effort in finishing Mirkwood and Umbar off, whereas Erebor had an easier time earlier on against Gondor and Dol Amroth, and oftentimes in a free-for-all that is kind of the deciding factor. If you can manage your earlier engagements, that will make your later engagements all the more easy. And I think that has been the deciding factor here. Could have gone the other way though. A little bit risky there, like I said. Maybe waiting a little bit longer than would have been comfortable to utilise all those crossbows. You can see there the Wanderers of Nimrodel were trying to get into a position, but they're just being chased off. That could have been another deciding factor if the Wanderers of Nimrodel had shot right down the Dwarven lines. Most of these units being pikes would have been unshielded. That would have been very nasty indeed. But again, good awareness from the Dwarves, shutting down the important units. There goes the Khandish general. And yeah, I mean, the Storm Guard again are a very good unit, but without the general here, you can see Khan's army in full retreat. Erebor looking... Well, I mean, most of their units, they have lost a fair amount, but I mean, to be fair, they still have some haggard pikes and halberds. They still have some decent amount of crossbows. So overall, a fairly dominant performance here from Erebor. Good teamwork though, and again, you know, in a free-for-all, that is the key. Again, you only have to look. The Erebor team performed very well. They took advantage of the gifts that were given to them, and they ran with it. To see the other side of the coin, looking at Umbar and Mirkwood, they were a little bit disparate early on, got a little bit separated, and they never really recovered from that. And to give Lothlorien and Khan credit, they did a very good job in that situation. I don't think there's really much of anything left other than these Wanderers of Nimrodel over here. So technically speaking, Dol Amroth and Gondor were the runners-up in terms of the amount of time left alive. Although I would say morally the runners-up absolutely should belong to Khan and Lothlorien, especially seeing as they won their half of the battle before having to deal with the dwarves. And again, this isn't the green light by any means to just start bashing on like the developers about the dwarves, like absolutely not. But you know, it is my opinion that at the moment Erebor maybe are just a little bit too good all round. Would be the key. You know, when you think of all-round factions, like I personally think of Arthedain and Rune, like they have good options in pretty much every aspect of their army, but there are very few areas in which they're exceptional. Erebor, on the other hand, I feel as though at the moment, I wouldn't call them overpowered. I would say it's a little bit too comfortable to play as Erebor at the moment. Like it's too easy to be good with them. Would be my criticism of them at the moment. It's easy to play as them, to field an army that you know is going to be effective, and that would be my criticism at the moment. They're not overpowered because they do have weaknesses. The morale is one. If a battle is running close and it gets into the late game, unlike a lot of the other, you know, Elven and Dwarven and even some of the higher tier human factions, Erebor are likely to fall apart, which is a problem for them that they have to deal with. And also they are not quite on the same level as some of the other really good infantry factions like Khazad-dûm or Imladris. But even so, not having as good an infantry force as like Khazad-dûm is not something that can be rightly listed as a weakness. I mean, you know, if you look at factions like Rohan, you know, they're going to be, they would love to have an infantry force as strong as Erebor's. So again, it's one of those debates, but nonetheless, I think that the Erebor team did exactly the right thing here. They performed very well together, and let's see what did the damage for them. Highborns, of course, doing very well. Hammerguard, the Highborns there in the vanguard being used very, very well. Crossbows, of course, getting very, very good kills because they were afforded the best position. Like again, in this sort of battle, it's less me bashing on the crossbows because, you know, they just rip everything apart, but the Gondor and Dol Amroth players allowed the crossbows that really excellent position to just tee off into their army, and you can't really cry over spilt milk when it comes to that sort of thing. Like, you asked for it, the crossbows are going to oblige you. And in this army, Highborns once again doing a good job. Iron for Pike's doing very well in the late game as well. Hammerguard, the Chariots actually not getting a lot of kills in either army, but the disruption that they do is the key thing here, not really the kills with the Chariots. Yeah, big thank you to Bogdan18k for sending this one to me. It's good to see a free-for-all finally in 0.97, and a very competitive one as well. Free-for-alls can often, when the sort of the snowball starts rolling, it can often sort of really be a very heavy victory one way or the other. Not the case this time, however. It was a very closely fought battle all the way through. A big thank you to all the players that were involved. Once again, when it comes to my schedule, you may have noticed I actually have been able to keep up a relatively regular schedule at the moment. I feel as though another channel update is probably going to happen soon-ish. And again, there's a little bit of turbulence, to say the least, with regards to me at the moment. But what I would say is, you know, that isn't really going to impact the channel all that much. Like, it may be the sort of thing that shows up in a channel update soon. But for the most part, I would say it's the sort of thing you don't really need to concern yourselves with at the moment. And in fact, just know that in terms of the amount of videos that I'm going to be releasing, it's probably going to be slightly better than the rather grim forecasts that I made a matter of a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. The next battle, I will endeavour to try and do that Khazad-dûm siege that I think it was Matt Bron sent me. It's always an interesting battle to see Moria in action, and I think it's actually a relatively lore-friendly one as well, which everyone always likes. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.